The American Civil War, a brutal and transformative conflict fought from 1861 to 1865, was the culmination of decades of simmering tensions between the northern and southern states, primarily over the institution of slavery and the extent of federal power. The seeds of conflict, antebellum America. By the mid-19th century, the United States was a nation deeply divided. The North was rapidly industrializing, with a growing immigrant population and an economy based on manufacturing and free labor. The South, conversely, remained largely agrarian, its economy and social structure inextricably linked to plantation agriculture, which relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved African Americans. The issue of slavery was the central, undeniable cause. Moral arguments against slavery, fueled by abolitionist movements, gained traction in the North. Southerners, however, defended slavery as a positive good, essential to their economic prosperity and way of life. Politically, the conflict manifested in debates over states' rights, the belief that individual states should have more power than the federal government, versus federal authority, especially concerning the expansion of slavery into new territories acquired by the U.S. A series of compromises attempted to maintain a fragile peace. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 all sought to balance the number of free and slave states, but each ultimately failed to resolve the underlying schism. Events like the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, 1857, which declared that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress could not prohibit slavery in territories, and John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, 1859, an attempt to incite a slave rebellion, further inflamed passions on both sides. Secession and the Spark. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican opposed to the expansion of slavery, in November 1860 was the final straw for many Southern states. Fearful that Lincoln's administration would eventually abolish slavery nationwide, South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20, 1860. By February 1861, 6 more states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, had followed suit, forming the Confederate States of America, CSA, and electing Jefferson Davis as their president. The flashpoint came on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces under General P.G.T. Beauregard bombarded Fort Sumter, a Union-held fort in Charleston, South Carolina. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, prompting 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, to join the Confederacy. The nation was officially at war. The early years, 1861 to 1862. Both sides initially believed the war would be short. The Union possessed significant advantages in population, industry, finance, and infrastructure. However, the Confederacy had a strong military tradition, skilled commanders like Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and the advantage of fighting a defensive war on familiar territory. The first major battle, the First Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas, in July 1861, was a shocking Confederate victory, dispelling any notion of a quick Union triumph. Union General Winfield Scott proposed the Anaconda Plan, a long-term strategy to blockade southern ports, control the Mississippi River, and slowly squeeze the Confederacy into submission. In the Eastern Theater, Union General George B. McClellan, despite his organizational skills, proved overly cautious. His Peninsula Campaign in 1862 aimed to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, but Lee's aggressive tactics, particularly during the 7 Days battles, forced a Union retreat. Lee then invaded the North, hoping to win a decisive victory and gain foreign recognition for the Confederacy. The ensuing Battle of Antietam, September 17, 1862, near Sharpsburg, Maryland, became the bloodiest single day in American history, with over 22,000 casualties. Though tactically a draw, it was a strategic Union victory, as Lee was forced to withdraw. Crucially, Antietam gave Lincoln the political cover to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 22, 1862. This declared that as of January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory would be then, thenceforward, and forever free. This transformed the war's purpose from merely preserving the Union to also ending slavery, and it discouraged European powers like Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy. In the Western theater, Union forces under Ulysses S. Grant achieved more consistent success, capturing Forts Henry and Donelson in early 1862, gaining control of key rivers. The bloody Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 was a hard-fought Union victory that opened the way for further advances down the Mississippi. The tide turns, 1863. The year 1863 marked a critical turning point. In the East, Lee, emboldened by a stunning victory at Chancellorsville, where Stonewall Jackson was mortally wounded, launched another invasion of the North. This culminated in the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July 1 through 3, 1863. Over 3 brutal days, Union forces under General George Meade repelled repeated Confederate assaults, most famously Pickett's Charge. Lee's army suffered devastating losses and was forced to retreat, never again possessing the strength for a major offensive into the North. Simultaneously, in the West, General Grant concluded his brilliant Vicksburg campaign. After a lengthy siege, the Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg, Mississippi, surrendered on July 4, 1863, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. In November 1863, Lincoln delivered his iconic Gettysburg Address at the dedication of a national cemetery, eloquently redefining the war as a struggle for human equality and the preservation of democracy. The final years, Grant versus Lee and Total War, 1864 to 1865. In March 1864, Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant as General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant implemented a strategy of coordinated offensives, aiming to engage Lee's Army of Northern Virginia relentlessly, while General William Tecumseh Sherman advanced through the Deep South. Grant's overland campaign in Virginia, May-June 1864, saw a series of brutal attritional battles like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Cold Harbor. Though Grant suffered heavy casualties, he understood that the Union could replace its losses while the Confederacy could not. Meanwhile, Sherman captured Atlanta in September 1864, a major industrial and rail hub. This victory significantly boosted Northern morale and helped ensure Lincoln's re-election in November. He pinned Lee down in a siege at Petersburg, south of Richmond. Sherman then embarked on his infamous March to the Sea, cutting a swath of destruction through Georgia, targeting not just Confederate armies, but also the economic infrastructure and civilian morale supporting the Southern war effort. This total war strategy aimed to break the Confederacy's will to fight. Sherman continued his destructive march northward through the Carolinas in early 1865. The end of the war and its aftermath. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Lee's army, starving and depleted, was forced to abandon Petersburg and Richmond. Grant pursued relentlessly. On April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Grant offered generous terms, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home after pledging not to take up arms again. Other Confederate forces surrendered in the following weeks. The joy of Union victory was shattered just 5 days after Appomattox, when, on April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. His death was a profound tragedy, robbing the nation of his leadership as it faced the daunting task of Reconstruction. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history, with an estimated 620,000 to 750,000 soldiers killed and millions more wounded or displaced. It resulted in the preservation of the Union, the abolition of slavery, formalized by the 13th Amendment, and the strengthening of the federal government. However, it also left a legacy of deep bitterness and devastation, particularly in the South. The ensuing Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, attempted to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society, but faced immense challenges and ultimately fell short of its goals, leading to a long struggle for civil rights. The war fundamentally reshaped the United States, forging a more perfect union but leaving scars that would take generations to heal. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.